Hi, this is Steve Worona, and you're listening to Campus Public Safety Online from the National Center for Campus Public Safety. Before I introduce today's session, here's a brief orientation to the Adobe Connect interface we're using. Your browser right now is showing the title slide for today's talk. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a box labeled Questions and Comments where you can read and type messages. There's a tab labeled Everyone at the bottom of this box, and that's the tab you'll use for all of your general messages, including questions and comments for our speaker. We'll be breaking for discussion several times during the presentation, so please do not hold your questions to the end. You can also send direct messages to a specific person by hovering your cursor over a name in the attendee list. One of those names is Technical Help, and that's the place to go if you run into technical problems. We're also monitoring Twitter for your questions and comments. Use hashtag NCCPSwebinar. If you miss part of today's conversation, or if you want to see some or all of it again, this webinar is being recorded and captioned. The link will be available shortly after the webinar on the NCCPS Webinars page. And watch your email for a link to a brief evaluation survey requesting your reactions and comments on today's session. Please take a minute to respond to that survey when the link arrives. We do appreciate your feedback. And now for our presentation. Today we're going to be discussing the challenges presented to college campuses by the legalization of marijuana in an increasing number of states. Our speaker is Ryan Snow, a police officer for the University of Illinois Police Department and founder and lead instructor with Prevention Leaders Incorporated. In his role with the University of Illinois, Ryan works to educate the community about DUI and drug-related issues. He's a certified drug recognition expert and has completed hundreds of hours of training related to drugs and the impact they have on the human body. He serves as a field training officer, RAD instructor, and crisis intervention team officer. He also works as an instructor and facilitator for the Police Training Institute in Champaign, Illinois, where he teaches a class on current drug trends as well as consent searches to hundreds of new police recruits every year. Ryan has provided training and presentations to thousands of students related to general law enforcement operations, alcohol and drug safety, theft prevention, diversity and inclusion, and police-citizen relations. He travels to conferences around the nation, speaking on the topic of drugs and their impact on communities. He's recognized as a leading voice when it comes to drug training and prevention in higher education. Ryan is an alumnus of Eastern Illinois University, where he received a BS in Education and an MS in Education Administration. Ryan Snow, welcome to Campus Public Safety Online.
Thank you, and I appreciate your intro, the words there. That was very nice, and I really appreciate just the invitation to speak for the webinar, and I welcome everybody out there that's joined us. Shout out to the group that has 14 members in your room today. That was pretty exciting to see. So I encourage you to take any of the information you learned today and move forward and kind of tell everybody that about what you learned, and hopefully we can get this information out there. So like Steve said, thanks for the intro. My name is Officer Ryan Snow. The one thing I did want to hit on was just the certified drug recognition expert portion there. I want you guys to keep that in mind and maybe reach out to either your campus law enforcement or your local police departments and see if you guys have any DREs available. They're an amazing resource. I went through, like Steve had mentioned, hundreds of hours in association with that training, and it is a huge, huge benefit to what I do on campus. And so if you guys have the ability to reach out to your local police departments or your campus police departments and find if you have any DREs on staff, they will be immensely helpful as you're moving forward through your drug training. You can always ask them for questions and things like that. They're a huge asset. So a little bit about the plan today. We just want to identify some of the current marketing trends and identify why cannabis has become more popular over the last recent years. We're going to review some data from various studies, learn about the dangers of cannabis concentrates. If you haven't heard about cannabis concentrates, we're going to be just touching on that a little bit. I do a much larger presentation on cannabis concentrates that I have lots of information on there, but because of time constraints, we just weren't able to include all that today. And then the last thing is just identify the area resources and possible solutions to education. I know I had a lot of questions on that. When we first had the registration for the webinar open, a lot of people sent in questions about some of the solutions that we can implement, and I'll be able to get to some of those today. Just starting here, I always include this slide in any presentation I do. A lot of the material that I'm presenting comes from other people's studies. So I am in no way saying that I completed these studies or did that kind of information. I'm pulling from around other people's studies and information that they've had and presenting that to you today through my own research. So why are we talking about cannabis? Let's just hit on that real quick. 28 states currently have laws legalizing cannabis in some form. So whether that's a medical cannabis or recreational cannabis use, there's currently 28, and the conditions for medical cannabis are rapidly expanding. The chronic pain, PTSD, muscle spasms, nausea, and vomiting. I mean, a lot of those things are ways that patients can go to their doctors and say, hey, I have chronic pain. I would like a medical cannabis card. Well, there is no real way to identify that chronic pain within that person other than from what they're saying. Some of the other things like nausea or vomiting, well, hey, I can go to the doctor and say I vomited 6 times in the last week. I may have, may not, but it may lead me to be able to get a medical cannabis card, and that's what a lot of people are doing here. So the cannabis use, these are some of the statistics brought from the annual report. Marijuana in the past month, people aged 12 or older, it's 6.2% in 2012, but 8.3%. And that's 22.2 million people in 2015. So that's obviously had a huge increase. Marijuana use is most prevalent within ages 18 to 25. And so that's our core group of people. That's who we're looking at in college. So 1 in every 22 college students uses marijuana daily or near daily. And it's doing nothing but increasing with the different laws that are going into effect. And then the last part there is the percentage of people that see regular marijuana use as dangerous. It has dropped drastically, and that has a lot to do with the passing of medical and recreational cannabis laws. So let's just look at why it's increasing popularity. Well, this is a shoe that Adidas came out with. Adidas dropped, they did a lottery pick for this, so you had to basically put your name in and hope that you were able to purchase the shoe. It's mainstream marketing, okay? So look at the subtleties of the stones there with the smiley face. It's stoned, we all get it if we're looking at it. The high potency, superior quality, 420 milligrams dosage on the tongue there, and it says prescribed, so we're talking about prescription. Oh, look, a pocket for money. No, it's not a pocket for money. It's a pocket to hide your drugs. So, and us in law enforcement know that there's plenty of shoes out there like this, but, it's more marketing. So let's look at some clothing. Clothing is becoming a lot more prevalent on campuses promoting the use of cannabis. You can see why Adidas has kind of been picked up as the unofficial sponsor there. Their symbol looks kind of similar, I guess, to a marijuana leaf. And so these are things that you guys should really start looking out for on your college campuses. Khalifa Kush is Wiz Khalifa is a rapper, and he has made smoking marijuana very easy, and has put out his own strain of medical marijuana. He's in the game just like everybody else. They're all trying to get paid off this stuff. So he saw the benefits of it, and he's putting it out there. And when a main figure in the youth culture puts out something like this, they're more likely to see it or try it or want to try it or something like that. So what are the consequences here we're seeing? Well, the SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana report, came out in 2016, and they had a couple different issues that they were looking at as far as what they thought might be happening. And so we're going to take a quick look at those. Regular pot use had gone up among 18 to 24-year-olds in Washington since legalization. So you're looking at a 4% increase, which isn't huge when you're looking at actual percentage numbers, but when you're looking at the number of people that actually influences, that's a huge increase in that short of time. They had not seen that big of an increase ever in that short of a period of time. What are the other impacts, some of the other impacts that cannabis has that people may not necessarily be anticipating is the impact on business. So the medical or the cannabis positive drug tests that came back from businesses skyrocketed once they instituted the medical and recreational cannabis within the state. One of my favorite quotes here is the percentage of people who missed work during the past 30 days, just because they didn't want to be there. This is incredibly indicative of somebody smoking cannabis, and we're actually going to talk about how that impacts the student life a little later on. But you can see here marijuana users are above and beyond everybody else in that category. How big is it exactly? Well, if this doesn't put it into perspective for you, I don't know what will. Colorado, for instance, has more marijuana businesses than Starbucks and McDonald's combined. Okay? If that doesn't put it into perspective, I have no idea what will. They're seeing such a large increase that, we don't know what these businesses are going to be, where they're going to be after the big boom, the original boom of the marijuana industry kind of subsides. A lot of companies or a lot of businesses are seeing a huge influx in foot traffic because they're one of the only states that actually has legalized it completely. So people are coming from outside states. Well, once the legalization starts sweeping across the nation, well, the tourism traffic is going to go down because they can actually stay in their own state and do it. And so where are these businesses going to be, and how many unemployed people are you going to see? How many buildings are you going to see that are going to have to be torn down or repurposed? There's a lot of influences here that I don't think people are seeing widespread. The traffic fatalities. I cannot speak enough about traffic fatalities and how cannabis has influenced that. In 2013, they were down to 10.8%, and the year that retail pot sales were allowed, now they legalized it in 2012, but then they basically told anybody you can't sell it until we legalized the actual sales of it, which was in 2014. About 18 months later or so, they skyrocketed to 22.1%. So you're looking at more than double the year recreational sales began. That's a big problem as far as the roadways go. Washington's seeing very similar results. The percentage of driving under the influence drug cases compared to the DUI cases went up drastically from 18.6% in 2012 all the way to 32.7% in 2015, and that was just January through April. So the increase has been above and beyond what they expected to see with the legalization. Something that I know some of the medical folks on here might be able to relate with is the medical marijuana-related poison control calls. So the hospitalizations and the poison control calls also went through the roof, and large in due part to the cannabis concentrates. It's a different style or higher concentration, THC concentration, than most people are used to. And so when longtime users of cannabis use some of the cannabis concentrates or the edibles, they don't understand how that might impact their body based on the THC concentration that's incorporated into those items, and they're basically overdosing on cannabis. And as that happens, they tend to have some anxiety about that, which is in part due to some of the cannabis, and they end up going to the hospital or calling in for poison control. And I know I've seen that on patrol myself. But what about that tax revenue? Remember all that tax revenue that was promised to all the states? Over half the pot money promised for drug prevention, education, all that stuff, over half of that never materialized because it went into the general fund budget. And that's what happens, right? So when you say we got this big pot of money and it's going to go over here, but you got, 10 to 20 people in between that, some of the money disappears, and that's what has occurred here. And this is the biggest one, Colorado statewide budget. They really said everything, all this money is going to come in here. The marijuana tax revenue, medical and recreational, only accounted for 0.5% of the entire budget from Colorado statewide budget. That's an issue. That's not as much help as they anticipated. So what about that crime? Remember all that crime they said they were going to get rid of? Prostitution went up 223%. Stolen property went up 121%. These are numbers that are outside the norm for that, and that they're experiencing because of the cannabis, recreational cannabis and medical cannabis. So I think we can break for some questions here. I see quite a few questions coming in, and I know we have some. Maybe I can answer some of those.
Sure. Thank you, Ryan. One that just came in from Ashley Torres. I've heard so many times that you cannot overdose on marijuana. So you can?
Oh, yeah. So that is a big note to take into account and send this out to the masses. You absolutely can overdose on cannabis. So the issue that people are talking about when they say you cannot overdose on cannabis or on marijuana is because you can't physically die from smoking too much weed. And I get that. But you can overdose on it, and it can send you into a psychosis, basically. So what we're experiencing here, we called them excited deliriums for years and years in law enforcement. We were seeing it more with LSD and ecstasy and things like that. But with cannabis now, the concentration of the THC has gotten so high that it's actually causing some psychotic breaks in people. And it's very easy if you just go online and look up, cannabis deaths or things like that. There's been lots of students. There was one report of a student fell off a balcony after eating cannabis edible, basically thought he could fly, basically. And when he jumped off the balcony, he had some paranoia and jumped off the balcony. Well, he couldn't fly, so he died there. There's another really widely publicized one out of Colorado that a husband woke up and actually murdered his wife after eating some edibles. And so these are the things that are occurring. It's not a specific overdose due to the over-smoking of cannabis, but it's an overdose due to the signs and symptoms that occur when someone smokes cannabis or ingests cannabis, I should say.
Ryan, someone's asking whether the references for the data that you're presenting will be available somewhere.
Yeah, I can definitely get that to you, Steve, and then maybe you can ship that out to the people, or you can post it up online somewhere, and we can definitely get some of that material out to them for sure.
Okay, tremendous. Michelle Williams is curious in the research that you're presenting about how you isolate the impact of marijuana on the rising statistics.
I'm sorry, I guess I don't really understand that one.
How you isolate the impact of marijuana from possible other causes of the statistics that you're reporting?
Yeah, I'm specifically just reporting the statistics that I've done the research on or seen the research done on. There are other factors that go into some of this stuff, but when you look at some of the numbers and you see such a drastic increase, basically from starting at the year 2012 going forward, there has to be at least a good amount of weight put on the idea that was due to the cannabis legalization aspects that went into law at that point, because we weren't seeing those changes up until that time. A lot of those numbers were staying static until that time frame hit.
Okay, and before I let you get back to your presentation, we note that a number of people seem to not be seeing the slides in the sequence or at the same speed that Ryan is speaking. I must say that's not everybody is not experiencing that, and we've asked our technical help person to be in touch with those of you who are having that problem to see if there's a way of addressing it. As someone did note, you can download the slides, print them out, and or put them on a second monitor and have them in front of you as you go along. So we hope that will help somewhat. And as I say, our technical help person will be in touch with you via private message to see if you can figure out exactly what's going on with your system. So Ryan, sorry for that interruption, but we'll let you get back to your presentation.
Yeah, no, not a problem. So what are the consequences on college campuses? So the top identified consequences that I've heard of were student discipline issues, retention and success in school, mental health related issues like I was talking about with those psychotic breaks that are occurring, impact on other drug use, and then the increased alcohol use. And that's I'll show a little bit about that here in the next couple slides. So the first, one of the first studies that I want to look at was recreational marijuana legalization in college student use, early evidence, is published in August 3rd of 2017. And the case study was done, data was collected from Washington State University, which obviously is in one of the states that's legalized the cannabis, and they legalized it for ages 21 and older starting in 2012. And they reviewed studies surrounding three options. So decriminalization, medical marijuana legalization, or MML, and recreational marijuana legalization, RML. The hypothesis on this was that marijuana use increased after RML due to both direct and social costs of using went down. So that's basically the laws changed, so that went down, and then the social costs come from the idea that people in general don't see it as being very dangerous or harmful. So the reported use in the past 30 days, you can see the marijuana started in 2005 as the lowest line there, and as it went up just slightly, the 2010 mark, or 2008 to 2010 mark, that was the medicinal cannabis laws were kind of passed in that area, and then the 2012 is when the recreational cannabis mark went up, and you can see how far that line jumped after that. The tobacco, alcohol, and other illegal drugs categories, you can see kind of stayed the same. Tobacco and marijuana, or I'm sorry, tobacco and alcohol dropped a little bit, but it's almost insignificant when you're talking about the statistical changes there. So the probability forecast that they used, what they thought they were going to be seeing versus what they actually saw was a huge increase. So obviously, like I said, it increased from 2008 to 2012 when they passed the medical marijuana laws. There was a huge jump in 2012, and the estimates they thought that were going to happen were 1.2 percentage points each year. So they expected an increase, but they obviously didn't expect the number of increase that they saw. Actual was between 2.0 and 3.5 percentage points per year, which caused a difference of 12 to 22% there. So, I mean, they expected to see a change, but it's very obvious that they didn't expect to see the amount of change that they ended up seeing within that. So some of the summarized results from the WSU study here, the decreasing likelihood of marijuana use with age of about 3% per year after the age of 20. So basically the first year undergraduates were the most likely to use marijuana, and that was between 3 and 5% over the other years. So this speaks to some of the programming that you're going to be doing and how important it is to show some of the students actually coming into the universities or colleges atmosphere that, there's some dangers there. And so some of the programming and prevention strategies are maybe best used early on, prior to them getting into the university or the college, and then also during their first year. Past that, if you haven't reached that student by then, you may be too late, but you can still attempt to go through that. It may not have the exact same effect. I'm assuming, I'm kind of guessing here, but it may not have the exact same effect because once they actually get into it, there is an addiction scenario there, and so they could be harder to reach past that point. Students in fraternities and sororities are between 4 and 12% more likely to use than other students, and so that could also speak to some of the programming that you're going to be doing. Some targeting of the programming may be possible there by targeting the fraternities and sororities. And then there was the marijuana use by underage students. The illegal side of that increased at least as much as the use by legal age students. So as these states are passing the laws and they're saying, hey, we're gonna go ahead and pass this recreational cannabis issue, but we're only going to do it for 21 and older, much like alcohol. What we're seeing here is, in some way similar to the alcohol, is that the underage students are using it just as much, if not more, than the legal age students. And so that's posing a concern within the campuses and, the disciplinary issues that go into effect with that. So something to think about as we move forward. The second one that I wanted to hit on was the changes in undergraduates' marijuana, heavy alcohol, and cigarette use following legalization of recreational marijuana use in Oregon. And I think this is a really interesting study that they did because they looked at the legalization of recreational marijuana in Oregon starting in July 2015. And they looked at changes in Oregon from pre to post RML relative to college students in other states across that same time period. So they actually used data collected from a Healthy Minds study, but they used 7 different large public universities, 1 with RML, which was Oregon, and 6 without. So it was a good, I guess, mix or look to who is affected by this. Is it going to be the state or the university that has the recreational marijuana, or is it going to be the ones without? So just summarizing some of the results here in this study, it showed an increase in marijuana use in different parts of the country that didn't actually have RML. So some of the states, even if you live in a state that necessarily didn't have legalization of marijuana in any form, you're seeing an increase in the cannabis use. And that has a lot to do with different factors based on, students are traveling to the states that do have RML and bringing the cannabis back. Also with the social aspects of it, the social costs of saying you smoke weed or having, something that you're doing with cannabis, it's not as high as it was before, prior to the legalization started. The marijuana rate's higher in male students, those living in Greek or off-campus houses. So again, here you're hitting that Greek housing. I think here you're probably seeing the increase or the usage rates higher in Greek or off-campus housing, mainly because in the residence halls it is harder to get away with it. You do have RAs and other building staff that are doing rounds and things like that, and on a nightly basis, and they're more likely to be able to detect or deter that type of behavior because it is against the housing rules. Students at the Oregon University who reported binge drinking were 73% more likely to also report cannabis use compared to similar peers at schools and states where cannabis remains illegal. So this is a really, really big statistic for me because I think it kind of shows that correlation of addictive behavior or overusing behavior. And when you're talking about the students at that university who reported binge drinking, were also 73% more likely to report the cannabis use. I mean, that you can't really deny that when you're talking states that don't have the recreational cannabis use. They're 73% less likely to use that when they're also binge. I mean, that's a really high statistic, something that, like I said, I don't really think can be denied when you're looking at those numbers in particular. And then the Oregon students under the age of 21 showed a higher rate of marijuana use than those over 21, which again goes back to the aspect that maybe some of the programming and the prevention strategies that you're implementing on your college campuses can be targeted towards certain areas for maximum effectiveness. And along with Washington showing it, now Oregon showing it. And so now we have two studies that correlate the same numbers. And so that's something that we want to look at. And the legalization of use is actually having an impact on the illegal use as well. So it's not just the legalized aspects of this that we're looking at. This is real quick. I just wanted to throw this up there and talk about these are the reported of seizures or drug interdiction seizures that occurred from Colorado and where they were reported to be going to. And so this is what I'm talking about. Even though your state technically, or if you look on the map here, your state has not legalized it, some of that weed or cannabis or whatever you want to call it from Colorado is making its way to your state, and a lot of it is making its way to your state. So just because your state has not necessarily legalized it, either recreation or medicinal cannabis, does not mean that your state is not seeing the impacts of other states actually creating those laws and putting them into place. Because right here on the map, you're seeing my home state of Illinois, 36 different seizures of loads of cannabis coming to my state. And so, I mean, we're pretty far away from Colorado, but we're seeing a pretty hefty amount come in. And my state actually does have medicinal cannabis legalized. So, little note for you guys outside of the states that have not legalized it, I should say.
Thanks, Ryan. Let's pick up some of the other questions that have come in. Bethany notes there's been a lot of confusion on our college campus regarding CBD, that is oils, lotions, etc. These are illegal not only on federal property but in general, right?
Yeah, so for anybody that maybe doesn't know what CBD is, the cannabis plant, you have different things that are incorporated with that. And the main two things that people try to extract from the cannabis plant are THC, which is a psychoactive component, and CBD is a non-psychoactive component. And CBD is actually the part of the cannabis plant or the extraction of the cannabis plant that has been proven or shown through different studies to actually have some sort of medicinal value to it. So CBD, when you ingest CBD, it does not make you high. It does not have that same effect as THC would have. And so the medicinal aspects of it are higher. It's been shown to reduce some anxiety and nausea and things like that through people that are using it. But there are many, many, many states that still don't recognize CBD as a legal entity. And so cannabis is cannabis. So CBD is cannabis. THC is cannabis. It's a part of the cannabis plant. And so you're correct in the idea that CBD is still illegal as long as your state has not legalized that portion of it. But regardless, because CBD is still part of the cannabis plant, it is illegal on college campuses based on the federal regulations that go into account with the drug-free schools and campuses.
Is it possible that these statistics have always been there, but they're now coming to light because once legalized, they were easier to track?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think people maybe didn't have the idea to actually go look for these statistics. The two studies that I just talked about were literally the first two studies, as far as I've seen. I mean, if somebody else has a study out there, please, please, please send it to me through email. But these are the first two studies that I've seen that even were associated with the actual impact of legalizing cannabis in some shape on college campuses. I don't know that there's been any other studies done on that, and I think it's really interesting. I think we're going to start seeing some more of these studies being done, and the impact is going to be become a little bit more prevalent.
Nolan Meyer says, I'm interested in reviewing any campus policies and strategies as we are currently developing our campus policy, if anyone is willing to share. And I'm asking you this not so much to suggest that everybody out there start typing in their policies, but Ryan, presumably there are lots of campuses that would like to find out what other campuses are doing in order to inform their own decisions. What should campuses that want to get that sense of what others are doing, what should they do?
You know, as far as I'm aware, I don't really have a whole, like a clearinghouse of campus policies or anything like that. I guess this speaks to one of my weaknesses. I guess I'm just, you know, I'm a campus police officer, and so my role as far as that goes doesn't extend too much further. But I've seen a lot of good material, come out of the National Center for Campus Public Safety, of course. And I've seen a lot of other material. If you just kind of Google search stuff, there are some material out there, but as far as policies and things like that, you know, if you're really looking for policy ideas, you're going to have to still follow that campus drug-free, the Drug-Free Campus Act, because that's really where you're going to derive your policy from.
One final question during this break, which may be difficult to answer quickly, but there's been a fair amount of discussion about cannabis and psychosis. Let me try to capture that. On the one hand, there's the view that cannabis does not cause psychosis, but it might trigger psychosis in those that have a pre-existing condition, versus studies that show an increased risk of psychosis among cannabis users. How do you balance those two viewpoints?
Yeah, I probably misspoke actually a little bit earlier. I guess I'm speaking of the triggering of psychosis more than the actual causing it. But yeah, the triggering, and then when you're looking at most of the triggering of different mental issues and mental disorders actually occur a lot of times on college campuses. So when you're introducing a foreign entity such as cannabis or a drug that's going to impact the brain as it does, you're going to see more of that increasing the chance or the likelihood that that's going to present itself within that time frame of college attendance.
Thanks, Ryan. We'll let you get back to your presentation.
All right. So I want to go over this real quick. This is an older study in 2015, but it's the academic consequences of marijuana use during college. And so some of the summarized results that I have from this one is the marijuana use has been shown to affect the working memory, learning, and information processing. And so obviously when you're looking at that, that's going to mainly be college. I mean, they could pretty much say it's been shown to affect college. Every college student is going to use their memory, learning, and information processing aspects of their brain during the college or university time frame. And so this is obviously a good study to kind of go back to and say, look, they did a scientific study on this, and this is what it's causing. And it's caused, for the long-term heavy use of marijuana, it's been linked to long-term changes in the structure of the brain. So changes that are associated with impairments in information processing, IQ, memory, attention, and neurocognitive performance. And so these are all things that kind of tie back into the college life and the success in college for these students. And so if they're having issues with maybe their grades, and you know they're saying, hey, listen, you know the college atmosphere is just so much different. I just can't pay attention. I'm just not understanding the material that's being presented to me. You know, there's a possibility that their use of cannabis could have an impact on that. And so that's something that you want to look at. The marijuana use predicted skipping class which predicted the GPA, which predicted time to graduation. And so you're having students, because going back to a previous slide when I talked about the workplace impacts and how people just weren't coming to work just because they just didn't feel like it, this is the same thing that's occurring in schools, is students aren't going to class just because they don't feel like it. And when they're not going to class, they're not getting the information they need, which is affecting their GPA, obviously affecting their chance to graduate there. So another one that I want to look at is one that was just recently done, and they surveyed college administrators to see problems as more students view marijuana as safe. And so they wanted to look at those changes and how they impacted, and then also talk to the administration of the universities and see how what changes have been implemented maybe or you're seeing happening. So they actually surveyed 744 administrators. They offered 523 completed, offered those responses, and 523 actually completed the entire survey. They looked at administrators in health, counseling, academic affairs, residence life, student conduct, campus safety, student affairs, AOD prevention, fraternity, sorority life. So a huge number of people here across many, many areas on campuses. They wanted to get a full spectrum of what was occurring on campus and who was seeing these changes based on cannabis use. The statistics on the states where the surveys were conducted, 88% of the responses came from no recreational use, and then 45% of them had medical use only. So they didn't legalize recreational use yet, but they had medical use. So the findings among the administrators, nearly 7 in 10 of them say that marijuana-related issues had increased or stayed the same over the last 3 years. So you're looking at 69% of the people that responded to this survey saying that marijuana-related issues are either increasing or staying the same. So they're definitely not going down. 54% believe students who perceive marijuana as safe has increased, and those same numbers were, mirrored by some of the other studies that were conducted. Most common consequence for marijuana on campus is a disciplinary action. And I mean, this is seen nationwide. So if your campus is one of the campuses that are, if someone gets caught with marijuana or cannabis, at least for the first time, sometimes the second time, if you're one of the campuses that's just doing a disciplinary action, some type of sanction or something like that, you're not alone, okay? So, but education and counseling are much less common on campuses across the nation. I say that we should kind of start moving a little bit more towards the education and counseling, but there's some issues that go along with that, and those numbers could be associated with the lack of addiction specialists that we actually have on campus. So 48% had one or more counselors specializing in substance abuse. So you're only looking at just under half of the people, or the college campuses that were surveyed, just under half of them had a counselor that specialized in substance abuse. And obviously that goes with budgetary concerns. We can't hire as many people as we really need to sometimes to get that job done. So handling the cannabis issue on campus, I think this is pretty telling on just exactly how much we have available here. The campus should do something. 79% of the people said that, hey, campus should be doing something. But look right next to it, only 5% of the people said they put a great deal of emphasis on preventing marijuana use. Well, there's a discrepancy there. We got 79% of the people saying there should be something done and only 5% of the people saying that they're doing something. Another huge impact, something that I preach all the time, is that collaboration with other schools, community organizations, get that collaborative team together so that we can combat this issue together, 16% had that in place. That's something that we need to up. We need those numbers up. So get out there and start that process. Identified issues with marijuana use, obviously academically disengaged, 63%. That's the whole, hey, the students aren't showing up for class anymore. That's what we're talking about there. Mental health issues, like I said, 36%. So the triggering of mental health issues or the showing of mental health issues, the displaying of mental health issues within this time frame, 36% of people said they had that, and then academic problems, 41%. Some of the barriers to prevention and enforcement that we looked at, the lack of the resources. You know, it's just, there's no standardized prevention strategies yet. You know, we have that, the alcohol impacts and things like that. We have all those systems in place. We know if somebody's, you know, they're using alcohol to a deficit to their life or whatever, we have these programs and these resources that we can throw into place. But for marijuana, there just isn't one yet. It kind of came on us a little bit too fast. We didn't know what we were getting into. So that's an issue. Lack of information. There's, you know, few educational opportunities out there, but there's widespread interest for this. Lack of coordination, like I said, 58% of them said that there was a lack of coordination between the different units on campus, and so that's where that campus coalition comes so much into place. We need to get those into place on more college campuses in order to combat the issue. And the opposition among students, well, it could be could be due to the lack of prevention, education, and enforcement that they were supplying these students. You know, that's why they're looking at it. Solution, information, and training. 100%. I agree with this, but it's just not being done. So 85% of administrators were very or somewhat interested in more training. 85% wanted the academic impacts of it. 82% wanted the identification of problematic use. So that's identifying the students that could have problems with cannabis use. And then 77% wanted those intervention strategies. And like I said, man, I'd probably be a millionaire sitting pretty if I could come up with something here to develop these, but you know, it's just not happened yet. And we're working, I'm doing everything I can to collaborate with the people on my campus to come up with some strategies that might work. But as far as proven time-proven strategies, they're just not out there yet because we just haven't gotten there. Marijuana is not treated as seriously as alcohol. So screening for marijuana is much less common. We don't screen for it a lot of times prior to students coming into the campus atmosphere. And, you know, that's obviously a problem. And then administrators are not aware of research showing as many issues with academic success associated with marijuana as alcohol or correlation with the marijuana and drinking in excess. So hopefully the studies that I showed you earlier, the one specifically about the binge drinking statistic, might help out with that. There are more studies going to be released, but I just don't know really when. So real quick, I want to touch on what you can do to help. First, you have to understand the disorder. And one of the things that I wanted to point out to you is a lot of the reasons why students say they smoke. So they're described cannabis use as, oh, it helps with my sleeping, feeling depressed, reducing my anxiety, appetite, or headaches. These are all things that students say, absolutely, smoking cannabis, that's what that helps with. Well, per the DSM-5, some of the withdrawal symptoms are sleep problems, depressed mood, anxiety, appetite problems, and headaches. Yeah, that's a problem because as you look across the columns there, those are the exact same things. So how much of these symptoms are occurring in the students because they're using cannabis? And they're actually using the cannabis as a mode to help with the symptoms. You know, you could talk to a heroin addict, and if he's saying, you know, man, I'm sweating all the time and I shake all the time, well, yeah, but as soon as you do the heroin, that stops, correct? Yes. And so these are withdrawal. They're managing their withdrawal. They're not actually helping their symptoms that they're feeling occurring. Some of the assessment and programming, a lot of people asked me about this previously prior to the presentation here. The drugabuse.com has a self-assessment quiz for marijuana use, and it pulls directly from the DSM-5 symptoms. And so it's a very, very quick poll. It takes you probably less than 2 minutes to complete this. You can complete it with students, and it'll put them in different categories. And so are they moderate dependence on cannabis? Do they have, or is it a more advanced dependence on cannabis? Motivational interviewing is really, really big. We've seen some success with motivational interviewing, and actually Dave Clausen, who is a fellow Prevention Leaders instructor with me, we do a combined class for cannabis and prevention utilizing the MI techniques. And so I really teach a fair amount on cannabis and teach you what the difference is between cannabis concentrates and things like that. And then Dave kind of comes in and teaches you those techniques with the MI that are really, really helpful for students using cannabis. One-on-one is the best for prevention strategies and for assessments. Small groups are fine if they're divided among those dependence categories. And so what I'm saying is they have an option to being influenced by the other students that they're in the assessment with, so, or the sanctioning class with. And so you want to divide them between people that are just moderate users or dependents on moderate and the people that have the more advanced dependence on that. And then there's multiple avenues for programming. We want it prior to arrival, after disciplinary contact, and just your general messaging of your campus. So education is key. Educate yourself first with the webinars, in-person training, joint training with law enforcement. Sponsor the training for campus groups. Academic counselors, I just want to note there, it's really, really, really big because, like I said, a lot of the issues that come into play here are with grades or retention and things like that. And so the academic counselors are actually sometimes the first ones that recognize this from students. Students come to them and say they're having issues in class, they're having issues paying attention or falling asleep in class, things like that. Well, if the academic counselors had the information that said, hey, maybe this isn't like an academic issue per se, it is a symptom of the cannabis use, you know, they can really help move forward and maybe pass that person from an academic counselor maybe onto a different counselor that would be able to help them with their addiction. Schedule training for students, community, and parents early and often using multiple strategies. Request help from your law enforcement. So what are the trends in your area? Are there DREs in your area that can help you with, you know, questions you might have? How can you help law enforcement get more training? Is A-RIDE available? A-RIDE is like a lower level of DREs. And then meet regularly to collaborate with people. And then also just request more information from people who use cannabis. So what type of cannabis is seen? You know, those types of questions. And then use their language. This is one of the biggest things. It isn't weed, it's not cannabis, marijuana, or any other slang name. It is medicine to some people. So oftentimes I'll ask somebody, do you do drugs? Or do you use any illegal drugs or any kind of illicit drugs or anything like that? And they're like, absolutely not. I just smoke weed. And I'm like, what? And it kind of goes back to it like, oh, I forgot. You know, they don't see it as a drug. They just see it as weed. And a lot of times it's not even weed. It's their medicine. I take medicine for my symptoms. I don't, you know, have an issue or anything like that. So I know that was very, very quick. It was a ton of information. Steve can tell you I had to take out a ton of information just to kind of fit it in this time frame, but I really appreciate you guys coming out. I know I've got some questions that I'd like to get answered from Steve before I go, but if you guys have any questions or anything, and I'm sure Steve will explain this, please, please, please make sure just to email me, get me those questions, and I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can for me. But Steve, do you have any other questions?
Oh, we do, and we'll get to as many as we can, and thanks for that offer, Ryan. And you earlier offered to send people the sources of some of the statistics you gave. We've also had a request for a summary of the voluminous resources that other people have typed into the chat room. So what we're going to do in order to sort of keep this all in one place, if this is okay with you, Ryan, we will send you the transcript of this area, and you can sort of choose out from what people have typed in here the resources that you will then send along to anybody who then follows up with a request to you. If that's okay, we'll get it all in one place.
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, let me pick up a bunch of questions that have come in over time. This one came in quite early. Would you speak to the impacts of decriminalization? Sort of a general question.
Sure. Decriminalization is a little bit different just because it basically is saying, it's still illegal, but it's not a criminal offense. It just becomes basically a civil citation. So similar to like a speeding ticket or something like that, in the state of Illinois, we decriminalized up under 10 grams of cannabis. And so if I catch somebody with under 10 grams of cannabis, I write them what equates to a ticket for $120. And then if they pay that after 6 months, that actually just drops off their record like it never happened. And so I think that mainly would speak to the social aspect of this and what people view as dangerous. And so, under 10 grams of cannabis in the state of Illinois is viewed as essentially a speeding ticket. And so if somebody's like, hey, I got a speeding ticket, it's not that big of a deal. Same thing is kind of coming into play now with the cannabis, like, hey, I've got this much cannabis. Well, it's no big deal. It's just a ticket. And so they're not seeing the impacts of that.
What can residential campuses do about students who have medical marijuana certificates? Can we continue to bar its use?
Absolutely, and that plays back into the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act, and that's illegal because it's based on the federal guidelines. It is still very much illegal federally, and so you can stop them from using that all the time. We got a lot of times we had students coming in from out of state that had their medical cannabis cards, say in Colorado, coming to Illinois, and when we found cannabis in their possession, we'd be like, hey, you can't have this here, and it was, oh, well, wait a minute, I'm a medical cannabis card holder. Well, it doesn't matter. You still can't do that here. And so that's the same thing that can come up when, campuses like that, they can absolutely bar the use.
It's clear that health educators and campus professionals are not all on the same page regarding their opinions or knowledge of cannabis use, at least compared to the consensus surrounding alcohol prevention, for example. How do we educate our students while simultaneously educating our professional colleagues or even encountering resistance from them? Yeah,
absolutely. Me personally, I think we need to start with the staff. We need to make sure that campuses have a collaborative group together and have come up with our own solutions to these issues as far as training goes way before we start sending that message out. We have to make sure we have a unified approach. Once we develop that unified approach, we can then bring that to the masses, I guess, as you can say, to the students and show them that we not only have a unified approach when it comes to the education and prevention side of it, but we also have a unified approach when it comes to the disciplinary side of things. So the police officers, the student discipline, the counseling, the academic advisors, everybody's on the same page. That's really, really important because otherwise you start kind of sending mixed messages to the students and it doesn't have the same impact.
How will the recent surge of tobacco-free campus policies influence how colleges and universities approach marijuana prevention on campus? Honestly, I don't see a huge influence in that because smoke is smoke, kind of a thing. The cannabis is illegal regardless, no matter where you're at, kind of a thing. The smoke-free campuses, that actually impacted University of Illinois. We did a big push for the Smoke-Free Campuses Act, and for us personally, it hasn't really changed much to do with cannabis. We still react to the cannabis the same way. We write tickets the same way. Luckily, though, we've kind of implemented some other solutions, hopefully with some educational processes there that can help with that. Thanks very much, Ryan. Thanks to all of our viewers and questioners from around the Internet. Check the NCCPS webinars page for a link to the captioned recording of today's presentation, as well as a link to our speaker slides. The brief evaluation survey I mentioned earlier should already be in your mailbox. It will take you no more than 2 minutes to complete. Please do. We read and act on your comments. Mark your calendars for the next Campus Public Safety online webinar, 2 to 3 p.m. on Tuesday, December 19th. Our speaker will be Emily Pwawan, Executive Director of HazingPrevention.org, and Emily's presentation is titled Building and Sustaining a Year-Round Hazing Prevention Plan. The registration URL is on your screen and clickable, or surf on over to the National Center webpage at nccpsafety.org. That's nccpsafety.org. The National Center for Campus Public Safety is now offering the second year of our extremely popular Trauma-Informed Sexual Assault Investigation and Adjudication Institute at a number of locations from coast to coast. The groundbreaking curriculum was developed in collaboration with nationally recognized subject matter experts and includes modules on 15 topics, from the effects of trauma to interviewing. The schedule for upcoming dates and locations is on your screen. For more details and to register, click the blue link or visit our webpage.